you expressed significant concerns that the White House has argued that your quotes were taken out of context. So I want to provide the full context of your quote, because you said, yes, I want to ask you about the means by which we can distinguish more or less serious offenders. I know that all of you sort of touched on that. Mr. Futrell, you talked about going from singular to one-on-one to group experience. I'm just wondering if there's some sort of inevitable and natural progression from one stage to the other, such that you could say that the least serious offenders are in the singular experience stage. And I guess my thought is, in looking at some of the testimony that other people will have later in the day, I was surprised at some of the testimony with respect to the motivation of offenders, and we're talking about child pornography offenders, and that there are people who get involved with this kind of activity who may not be pedophiles and who may not be necessarily interested really in the child pornography, but have other motivations with respect to the use of technology and being in the group. And here are lots of reasons perhaps why people might engage in this. And so I'm wondering whether you could say that there could be a less serious child pornography offender who is engaging in the type of conduct in the group experience level because their motivation is the challenge or to use the technology. They're very sophisticated technologically, but they aren't necessarily that interested in the child pornography piece of it. Now I find that a pretty remarkable argument, that people in possession of child pornography are not actually interested in the child porn. They're not pedophiles. They're just interested in technology. Is that? And I wanted to provide the whole quote because the White House said that portions of this were used out of context. So this is your entire quote. Do you agree with that sentiment, that there is some meaningful population of people who have child pornography but are not, in fact, pedophiles or getting satisfaction from it?
Thank you, Senator, for allowing me to address what appears to be a question that I was asking in the context of a hearing on child pornography. You've provided the entire quote, and it looks as though I was asking that of someone, not taking that position. And the position that I've taken in all of my sentencings involving child pornography offenders is to ensure that despite the attitude and view of many of the offenders who came before me when I was a trial judge, that they were just lookers, that they weren't really harming anyone, that they were curating their collections and they never touched a child, I made sure that they understood that notwithstanding their collecting behavior, that they were causing significant harm.
So Judge Jackson, all right, you raise your actual sentencing, and I think that's very productive. Let's take a look at your actual sentencing. And you've had 10 different cases involving child pornography. These are the cases. There are two, U.S. versus Buttry and U.S. versus Can, for which the government did not make a recommendation. And you said earlier, when Chairman Durbin was trying to preempt this line of attack, you said it's a sickening and egregious crime, which I very much agree with. And you said the guidelines lead to extreme departures. Okay. Let's look at what the prosecutors are asking for. And I would note that this was in the District of Columbia, where prosecutors are far more liberal than many of the prosecutors in this country. And in every case in which, so United States versus Hess, there was a mandatory statutory minimum of 60 months, and you imposed 60 months because you had no discretion. In United States versus Nickerson, there was a mutual agreement of the parties to 120 months, and that's what you imposed. In every other case, United States versus Chazen, the prosecutor asked for 78 to 97 months. You imposed 28 months. 28 months is a 64% reduction. In United States versus Cooper, the prosecutor asked for 72 months. You imposed 60 months. That was a 17% reduction. In United States versus Downs, the prosecutor asked for 70 months. You imposed 60. That was a 14% reduction. In United States versus Hawkins, the prosecutor asked for 24 months. You imposed 3 months. That was an 88% reduction. In United States versus Savage, the prosecutor asked for 49 months. You imposed 37. That was a 24% reduction. In United States versus Stewart, the prosecutor asked for 97 months. You imposed 57. That was a 41% reduction. Every single case, 100% of them, when prosecutors came before you with child pornography cases, you sentenced the defenders to substantially below not just the guidelines, which are way higher, but what the prosecutor asked for on average of these cases, 47.2% less. Now, you said you made sure the voice of the children was heard. Do you believe in a case like United States versus Hawkins, where the prosecutor asked for 24 months and you sentenced the offender to only 3 months? Do you believe the voice of the children is heard when 100% of the time you're sentencing those in possession of child pornography to far below what the prosecutor's asking for?
Yes, Senator, I do.
Could you explain how?
I will. A couple of observations. One is that your chart does not include all of the factors that Congress has told judges to consider, including the probation office's recommendation in these cases.
Well, Judge Axel, we don't have those probation. The committee has not been given the probation office's recommendation. We would welcome them. Mr. Chairman, I would love to see those. We don't have access to them.
The second thing I would say is that I take these cases very seriously as a mother, as someone who, as a judge, has to review the actual evidence in these cases and, based on Congress's requirement, take into account not only the sentencing guidelines, not only the recommendations of the parties, but also things like the stories of the victims, also things like the nature and circumstances of the offense and the history and characteristics of the defendant. Congress is the body that tells sentencing judges what they're supposed to look at. And Congress has said that a judge is not playing a numbers game. The judge is looking at all of these different factors and making a determination in every case based on a number of different considerations. And in every case, I did my duty to hold the defendants accountable in light of the evidence and the information that was presented to me.
In 100% of the cases, was the evidence less than the prosecutors asked for?
Senator, the evidence in these cases are egregious. The evidence in these cases are among the worst that I have seen, and yet, as Congress directs, judges don't just calculate the guidelines and stop. Judges have to take into account the personal circumstances of the defendant because that's a requirement of Congress. Judges have to consider things like the victims, and when I was talking about making sure that victims' circumstances are heard, it was about my sentencing practices that I
show victims being heard with respect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.